Hey girl gang, hey super mamas. We're here today for a combined session and we are continuing our series on the rebirth of joy, reclaiming reproductive health and justice for Black birthers. Today I am joined by another fantastic guest bringing in the final subject and that is the future, y'all. What does the future look like? We've been talking about the historical context, the presence. We've even talked about the mental health and how this has played a role over the years as we have journeyed from being enslaved to Jim Crow to fighting for just the basics when it comes to being treated equally in this country. So now I really want to talk about where we're going in the future. We've been speaking about reframing this conversation, but what about the work that's happening now to really hone in on where we're going in the future? I am joined by a very special guest, a certified nurse midwife and educator, a woman who has been committed to birth work for many years and who's been committed to changing the narrative but also changing the statistics. So make sure you keep watching so you can catch this amazing conversation with Kaprice Welsh. So I am joined by a good friend and colleague of mine today, Kaprice Welsh.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me, Joy.
I am so excited to have Kaprice on today. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in birth work in the first place.
I think, I was a labor and delivery nurse. So out of nursing school, I think during my nursing clinical rotation in OB, I met a midwife. And I think from there, I knew what I saw what she was doing. I said, that's what I want to do. So I kicked I want to be a pediatrician to the curb. And I was like, I think midwifery feels right for me. So that's how I landed there. And I went to graduate school and then just birth work and taking care of women has been a natural calling for me. So it's where I'm supposed to be.
We met when I was probably maybe just starting out in my career or maybe even still a resident. And so at that time you had started working with the Georgia OBGYN Society and kind of starting to do some work in helping to educate Georgia's OBGYN physicians and kind of help coordinate some of the efforts that were starting to kick off about maternal morbidity and mortality prevention. How did you get interested in that?
It was really our executive director and in collaboration with an OB out of Emory Midtown Crawford Long Hospital. And he had worked on maternal mortality in Virginia and came to us with the idea that that's something we should start to look at. And we thought that that was really important and wanted to see kind of what that, what was he really talking about. But when we started to unpeel and look at the data and the articles in the literature that has started to be written, and that was probably back in 2012, 13, maybe, we started to really look at this could be something that in Georgia we could take on in a maternal mortality review committee. And so we pulled together some folks from the CDC, the state, some OBs, and we all came together brainstorming that we could really pull together a committee and how would we begin to look at this and what would that look like? So we were really kind of on the cutting edge nationally in being able to do that. We became trailblazers in a sense in that work. And I think at that time or shortly after that, death by delivery had come out. And
oh yeah, I remember that.
Other publications had come out. And that was really all that you saw. And, kind of not a lot going on like it is now nationally about what the urgency was and what the issue was. So it was really that kind of really drove my interest in maternal mortality and being on the committee at that time and just seeing the cases of women dying. And, we were not talking about Black women dying at that time. We were just really reviewing the cases and looking at, what the causes were. It took a couple of years to really start to take a step back and say, wait a minute, who is disproportionately represented in these cases of death? And then that's when it became pretty obvious that it was Black and brown women.
Now, I remember being a resident and listening to a lecture by Dr. Zakiba Henderson, who was at the CDC at that time, and she was telling us about the fact that Georgia was one of the most dangerous states in which to be pregnant or to have a baby. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. And I remember that really kind of sparking my interest in maternal morbidity, mortality prevention. And then I think maybe I had just finished residency or just gotten started, and we had a conversation, you and I had a conversation about, wow, Black women tend to be disproportionately affected. And when we started to dig deeper into those numbers, I thought, okay, wait a minute, something needs to be done about this. What was it like for you as a Black woman sitting in some of these conversations with maybe more of the majority and starting to talk about this? Like, hey guys, do you notice that it seems to be more Black and brown folks disproportionately affected? What were those conversations, those initial conversations like?
It really, you sit back and you just look and you can see what's happening, what's going on, and the conversation around, through, everything but that, wait a minute, we need to look at why Black women are being affected. I mean, as a Black woman sitting there, you just can't believe, like, why are we not talking about like the elephant in the room? Like, it makes you feel like when people talk about, this racism and it's race, and you're like, nah, I don't know. But when you start to sit there and see how people sort of dance around the issue of talking about Black women being at the center of those cases, you're like, why? Why are we not talking about this? Why are we not saying that Black women are leading the causes of death that we're reviewing in all of this data that we're seeing? But we really didn't, there was not that conversation. They were really focused on the clinical, and not really focused on anything else. And it was, it was disheartening. It was ridiculous. You're like, it's, when are we going to start to look at who is dying, right? When are we going to start to look at all of the interventions and things that we're talking about making improvements? Black women were not at the center. And you can see in the case reports, it's not mentioned in those earlier reports. A lot of the interventions is really focused on the clinical improvements and not really focused on the clinical improvements for whom. It felt like, there was more going on that wasn't being said that needed to be said. And those were conversations on the side that needed to be brought to the larger group. And that took more time to do.
And when did you start to feel the tide change? Because I remember us at one point trying to start to have some of these conversations, trying to start some committees, and there was kind of this pushback, or I won't even say pushback as much as kind of like, no, we're not ready for that. I don't think it's the time, that sort of thing. It was very polite, but pushback nonetheless. When did you kind of feel that tide changing where it was like, okay, now we really are ready to start talking about this?
Probably about 4 years ago. I mean, we had been reviewing cases for a few years. And I think that until it became sort of nationally, you could feel the bubbling up nationally and the conversations in the public health space changing. The CDC talking about it a little bit differently and building this Maria system. We were really integrally involved with the CDC around building the system that was going to be collecting the cases and analyzing the cases and the data, really involved with how that was going to look. Then it became, and CDC is in Georgia, and the folks that were involved in those early conversations and that early data collection and what needs to be done was happening here with our Maternal Mortality Review Committee. And they even started to say, wait, we're seeing more cases here with Black women. So it took several years, but in that 4 to 5 years, we started to see the tide change, that now we start identifying Black women are 2.7 times or 3 times more likely to die. And so it took some years. I would say about 4 to 5 years ago, we started to see the change in that, but it's still not where it needs to be. It's definitely not. It's not happening in an intentional way, the way that you would think, like, oh my gosh, what can we do for Black women in this state?
And I would certainly agree with you on that. If you didn't catch the episode we did with Rose Horton, I would say that, she has probably been one of the leaders in starting some of that intentional work. But until we're doing that at every hospital, for every birth, every time, I think we're still kind of behind the 8 ball. And that's really the crux of the conversation that I wanted to get to with you today is, where is the future going? Because this is the rebirth of joy. This is the rebirth of reproductive health and rights. for Black birthers. Where are we going with this work? With all of these projects that we're doing, we're on all these committees together, we're doing all this research to really prove that the data is real and to be able to present this data to our legislators and to funders and to all of these different folks, to people who are educating medical students and residents and nursing students and nurse midwives. Where do you see this work going? Why are you so passionate and why are you so committed to this work? What is your end point? What's your goal for Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Black mother. I still catch some babies, and I see it in the care that I give for Black women. And when I go, I work just per diem. So I'm only catching babies sometimes and I'm meeting them for the first time. And through all of our work around respectful care, around Black maternal mortality, these moms are coming into the system. They're scared. They don't feel heard. They don't feel like, that they're getting the best care. So I'm trying to be very intentional about my interaction and my relationship with them in that small window of time. And I'm there for their birth. And that's really it. And making them feel safe, making them feel heard, and being a partner in their care. And that makes me more passionate about it. And then I hear, I work in public health as my other hat, and hear about all of sort of these efforts around improving things for mothers having babies in the hospital, but we know after as well. During the postpartum period is when we're seeing the majority of the maternal deaths. And so that's where my public health work is in the community partners that I engage with, and helping them understand sort of the full spectrum of the Black birth experience. Are we engaging the right partners? You do see a robust sort of uptake. Everyone's getting grant funding and everyone's doing this and that. But to me, it feels like what we do for infant mortality. A bunch of people getting funded for things and spinning their wheels, and when the money is gone, are they going to be gone out of our communities? And what will Black women gain and get from this, right? Because I've seen it in so many public health initiatives. What I'm hoping, it's really great that from the White House down, that we're starting to see sort of this groundswell of the omnibus bills and all of this. It's going to take legislation, it's going to take policy change, it's going to take a groundswell of, Black women moving it for us. Racism exists, implicit bias exists, and I can't change a racist. I can't. I'm not trying to change your mindset. So how am I going to arm my Black women, my sisters, my mothers, my community to say, we're not going to stand for this type of treatment. We're not going to tolerate being at the 2 to 3 times, the death rate of white women. We need to be there for our babies like you do, and start to command and demand policy change. And how do we do that? And how do we come together and do that? And what works for us? And not, let someone come into our communities and do all the research, get all the data and information they need and leave us with what? With nothing. So really motivating, Black women to be advocates for themselves, speak up for themselves. We're going to be the, change. I'm going to change how you treat me when I come into your office. I'm going to make sure that you call my blood pressure is how I'm calling you to let you know that I need something done. So really making sure that women are aware that, listen, you are your advocate. You and your husband and your mother and your team have to be all on board with taking care of you and your baby to empower your community. And so I'm hoping in all of this that we realize that, I am my sister's keeper, and that we need to come together as a community of Black women to kind of lift ourselves up and be strong against the system that may take some time to change. But in the meantime, Black women are dying. And I need you to know how you need to go in there defensively, offensively, to be sure that you come out of there alive, right? Come out of the situation alive, well, and that you're informed, right? So that you're an informed consumer of healthcare.
I think that there is a certain amount of onus on each individual, regardless of your race or ethnicity, to take responsibility for your health care. Dismantling racist systems is going to take some time. And in the meantime, we have to decide what it is that we need to do to make sure that we're okay. We have to continue to speak up and say, hey, that's unacceptable. That we are dying at 2 to 3 times the rate of our white counterparts. It's unacceptable that people have to deal with implicit or explicit bias within the healthcare setting. Arming women, all women, with the right language to have conversations about their health, because I think that that's usually one of the biggest issues. We don't really know how to talk about it. We may feel intimidated or overwhelmed when someone starts talking to us, but there is always a way, always a very compassionate and kind and intelligent way to say, hey, can you put that in terms that I can understand? Can you take a breath and a moment to speak to me to make sure that I can get what you're saying to me and that I can help take part in my care and be able to make a shared decision with you, because this is about me, this is about my family, this is about my body and my baby. We are sitting on these committees and doing this research. One of the things I really love about a lot of the projects we're working on is that they involve the patients and the patients' families and the patients' communities. That's something that I feel is a whole new fit. What do you think about that? I think that's something that we had not seen in the past when we're talking about universities doing research. We had not really involved women and their partners and their mothers and their aunts and their communities.
These initiatives that are looking to improve the clinical side of maternal morbidity and mortality, looking to include some of they call social determinants for health, but it's like, how much you make, your economics, your education, your housing, and all of that impact us on the long-term spectrum, right? That impact our lives, that have influence on where we are and what we're doing now, right? Let's just your community, your environment, all of those impacts. I think that, everyone looks at those and talks about those. Please don't get me on my soapbox about, every conversation I'm in, I getting real upset because they're talking about Black women as if we're all under-resourced, we're all low-resourced, we're all, don't have this, don't have that. I'm like, what about the mothers and the people like who have? We're still dying. It's like, it's not only women who don't have and under-resourced and make this amount. And those are not the only people who need education, who need resources, who need help, who need to know how to talk to providers. Because I make six figures and I have a college education doesn't mean that I feel comfortable talking to my doctor who, is the power dynamic. And so that becomes a very difficult, sort of place to be when you're talking about how do you prepare women to be able to come into those spaces and feel comfortable, advocating for themselves. It's a hard place for women, and especially if they don't have people that look like them. Right. So if I'm coming in and there's the race thing and you feel like you're not treated well, you feel like your provider doesn't understand, or they're talking to you in a way that you don't feel comfortable. And no one wants to feel like they're stupid. Like, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not going to tell you I don't understand, because I don't want to feel foolish. And I think we have to get out of that mindset, but that's real. People talk to you, it's like, I'm just as intelligent, I understand what you're saying, when in actuality, you can ask a lot of people, do they? And sometimes they'll say no. It's a lot of language, it's a lot of words, it's a lot of complex sometimes.
It is. It's a lot of language. There was an article that came out in the New York Times maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, where they surveyed people who had anywhere from less than a high school diploma or an equivalent all the way up to a PhD. And they asked them, when they came out of their doctor's visits, did they understand what was said to them? And across the board, they understood very little of what was said to them. Most of those people who came out of those doctor's visits did not, because medicine is a whole nother language. Yes. And there are very few doctors, unfortunately, who translate well. I was talking to my mom about her health condition and what was explained to her, and she, and she's a very intelligent woman, but she just couldn't. She said, I really don't know she said, some of the doctors are really good at explaining to me, and some of them are really not. And she said, she said, what does this word mean? Or what does that phrase mean? And so we had to, break it down. And so I really try to use a lot of analogies, try to compare things to what people can understand. Something
relatable. Make it relatable.
No. Yeah, because if you don't understand what people are saying to you, you might just nod your head and say, okay, And then people will get up to the front desk after I've just spent 30 minutes of what I think is brilliantly explaining something, and they'll get up to my receptionist and say, I don't know what she just said. And I'm like, oh, dang, I got to come up with something better. Because, I want people to understand what we are talking about, because if they can't understand, they can't partner with me to have a better outcome. And helping providers understand that, hey, the way that you're speaking to the patient is not helpful, because if they don't get it, we just lost the battle. Involving patients in research and in guiding how the research is going, involving their family members, involving their churches, involving their schools, like that's huge.
I think, nothing for me without me, right? So we need to be at the table with anything that you're trying to develop or design for Black women or Black families. You ain't even in a Black family. You don't know any Black families. You don't even go to dinner with a Black person. How are you going to design something for me? You have to understand me. So, it's really this mindset around those institutions, engaging women who with lived experiences, we call it, because you can't really develop an intervention or anything about me without me, because I have to be a part of that, and what's going to work for me, what's going to work for my community, what's going to work in this overall scheme of what you're trying to do, because you could come up with 20 things and ain't none of them hitting what matters to me.
That's what's really going to help to move the needle in terms of changing these statistics. So I love the fact that I'm seeing places like Morehouse School of Medicine Center for Maternal Health Equity bring patients to the table, bring moms and families to the table and say, hey, what would have worked better for you in terms of getting that information, or in terms of how do you want to be treated? What do you see as respectful care? Because, you were taught things like you referred to the patient as Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, but do they really see that as respectful? Does that mean something to them? Or you ask permission, or you tell them what you're going to do? Does that really make them feel like they're respected? Do they even want to hear that? So there's so many different things that are at play here when you're going into a patient care setting, especially when it's something as intimate as a birth. To hear what's important to me, right? Because I know that as a midwife, and for me as an OB, there are things that are on our list that are super important to us, but they might not necessarily be the same things that are important to that family or that mom that are there, in front of us. And so to hear what's important to them, and then to explain why what's important to me is important to me. And usually for us, it's safety for that mom or for that baby, but her baby shower may be much more important to her than it is to me. And I'm more concerned with your blood pressure being high, and yes, we need to go over to the hospital, and she's saying, oh no, my baby shower is tomorrow, and I'm saying, oh no, if we don't go to the hospital today, there might not be a baby to shower. So we have to communicate. We have to be able to find out what is important to you. Okay, I can hear you. I understand what you're saying. Now let me tell you what's important to me and why, and we need to communicate about that.
And when you do that, they respect that, though. When you give them that amount of information, and people respect that, and you'll find that they'll give in. I can persuade a lot of people that didn't want something with the last midwife, and I come in and I sit down right eye to eye. I'm like, all right, now what's going on? Like, what's this? You don't want this, you don't want that, and I can usually, because I have, sitting down and building a rapport with them and explaining things in a way they're like, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. What they were saying before didn't make sense. So when you explain it in a way that, that makes sense for me, and that comes with dialoguing with them and kind of understand what angle you kind of got to take, what's important to them, it helps. It makes the world a difference.
If I had a dream for the rebirth of joy, it would be for Black birthers to feel respected, to feel safe, to feel honored, to feel that sense of joy and anticipation versus that sense of fear and wondering if someone is going to take care of them, if someone is going to disrespect their bodies in some way, or if someone is going to treat them in a way that is less than dignified. I asked a patient about their desires for their birth, and I was thinking we were going to talk about whether they wanted to sit on a birthing ball or walk around, or if they wanted to eat something, and she just really looked at me and she said, well, first of all, I just don't want to die. And that to me it really hurt my feelings. I thought, oh my God, like, I'm just asking you about personal preferences. Like, do you want soft lighting or music or something? And you're just trying to think, can I just survive this birth? And that's so sad to me, because, and that just lets me know that we've done a really good job about educating folks about the statistics. And they understand that, hey, you got to figure out how you're going to survive this. But what about moving forward now that we are getting this buy-in, that we are getting these bills and this funding and all of this research? How are we going to move that needle forward to a place where people can be joyful and anticipate and come into a safe space and have someone that they can feel comfortable with, to be able to educate providers about how to provide respectful care, and maybe, teaching them about what are some of the concerns, and then teaching folks who are in the community and who are birthing about how to navigate that process in a way that they feel confident and strong and able to advocate for themselves. So what's left to do for us to push this work forward on both the patient side and the provider side? And then I guess I would throw in a three-pronged approach and say the community as well.
I think, knowledge is power, right? I think that, and stop the fear mongering, right? So yes, birth is can be scary, but you're gonna die. I think, it's a lot of that, but birth is beautiful. Birth is wonderful. Bringing life into this world is, sort of a wonderful experience, and don't take that away from women, right? And I think that we've done too much of that. Like, we don't talk about the light and the beauty and the positivity of the experience. It does not all, it goes so beautifully sometimes. And I just feel honored to even be in the room on the journey, with someone who's birthing their baby, right? I am, privileged to be present for that joyful time. And so I even tell them, this is a joyful time. This is, this is wonderful. This is a blessed day, right? That your baby and you are safe and here. And so I don't think we can't take that away from women. Elevating those birth experiences where they have phenomenal experiences. There's a midwife, a home birth midwife here, and midwife Angelina. I love her videos, her births that she shows.
Yeah, me too.
Those experience, and we're not talking about those. We're not elevating those. We're not, bringing those into these conversations as well. We're talking all one and none of the other. And I think that we need to, on our side, bring more of those stories into our conversations, and give a space for that. We have to hold space for that as well, but not ignoring the other things. And we're going to have to continue to work on the system for change. And those things are, to me, long-term. Continue training on microaggression, bias, and all of that. I think you have to push from every direction. We have to push for more change in healthcare. They could cover more things. Healthcare insurance can cover more things for women, right? They can cover blood pressure cuffs and monitoring, and, all of those. They can cover more. They can cover doulas. I mean, we fighting for a living wage for doulas, to give women have access to doula care. So I think that we have to continue those struggles and policy changes and fights on those ends. And, in systems that are biased and, telling you got to do this and you can't do that. And we have to, continue to fight for that. Do not, create an experience for women that's all about 2.3 times likely to die from having my baby. There's a lot of beautiful Black babies running around, and that experience, to be a part of that, is so joyful when it goes well. And so even sometimes it doesn't go the way they expected. I just go and I hug them and I said, this is a blessing, you and your baby are safe and here. So it's still a joyful experience, a joyful occasion.
I am seeing so much with technology that gives me so much excitement, because I'm seeing things like dashboards be created. And I know we looked at a dashboard from another state on a project that we were working on. And that gives us the ability to track data. It's so exciting, and get down to a granular level to see, like, okay, what hospitals, what
hospitals are bad, which doctors are bad,
what nurses, what is happening in some of these spaces where outcomes are not as good.
That drives change. That drives change, because a lot of times, I recently did a study that I presented at the American Public Health Association, and it was all these doctors saying, oh, it's not me. But when you have a dashboard that's actually tracking, like, where these bad outcomes happen, and you see that it is you hurry up and correct that. You course correct very quickly, because you're like, oh, wait, that's me, that's my data. Oh, I gotta hurry up and fix that. Our C-section rate, we gotta do better. So yes,
right, exactly. Like, oh, that's my C-section rate. Oh, girl, no, I gotta do something about that. So we see that, and we course correct very easily. So that data, because we believe in hard facts in the scientific community. So that, and then also putting data driven instruments in the hands of patients and saying, okay, if I can plug in my signs, and we had Lexi, who talked about her application Mama Love, and being able to put in my symptoms and have an algorithm that tells me, okay, red, yellow, green, go to the hospital now, see your provider within the next few days, or you can schedule an appointment to discuss your concern, but it's not super, right away, right now. There are so many things that are coming in the future that can help us regain that confidence and that joy and that connectivity that we used to share as a community, and wrapping arms around these moms. So like knowing there's the mothers of the church used to wear those white uniforms, and they used to call them mothers or nurses, in the church, and they can say, hey, I know you just had a baby, you look a little swollen, let's take your blood pressure. We need to get back to that sense of community, that sense of love and joy and support. You are your sister's keeper. So I am just so excited. This kind of conversation just gets my juices flowing, and I'm so grateful to you, Kaprice, for all of the work that you do. I have no idea how you do it all, but I'm thankful for it, and I'm so grateful for you joining us today, and I'm looking forward to our finale conversation with Dr. Fleta Mass Jackson, who has been doing this work for so long, and who has pioneered a lot of the research and the data that we do have. So make sure you're staying tuned for that. Kaprice, thank you so much, and I will see you soon again for the finale, and I want you guys to stay tuned on BTV. You can catch BTV now on Roku, and you can certainly catch all my full episodes on Delivering Joy MD TV, and we will catch you next time. Peace.